The lights of the studio bathed the stage in cold clarity. Stephen Miller adjusted his suit jacket with precision, his signature smirk barely concealed beneath his rehearsed calm. He had come prepared, with papers, footnotes, and what he thought was an airtight narrative about the Constitution. The setting was a special live segment titled Law and Liberty, hosted by a neutral moderator who, by design, would say little and let the clash unfold. Across from him sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, dressed in deep navy, her expression composed but alert. She didn't bring papers. She didn't need them. "Let's begin," the moderator said. "Mr. Miller, you've repeatedly claimed that the Constitution grants unchecked executive power in times of national unrest. Explain." Stephen leaned forward, voice measured. "Article 2 makes clear the president is the ultimate decider in times of emergency. It's why Lincoln suspended habeas corpus. It's why Roosevelt interned Japanese Americans. It's the burden of command." Jasmine didn't flinch. She simply raised her eyebrows, then leaned in slowly. "I'd like to begin by reminding Mr. Miller," she said, voice sharp as a scalpel, "that citing two of the darkest constitutional violations in American history isn't a flex. It's a warning." The audience murmured. "And let's be clear," she continued. "The Constitution doesn't grant divine right. It grants delegated power, reviewable, limited, and always accountable to the people." Stephen tried to jump in, but the judiciary. She cut him off, calmly. "You mean the same judiciary your party tried to pack? The same judiciary that forgot Brown versus Board every time voter suppression came up?" The moderator blinked. Stephen's smirk faltered. Jasmine leaned back, her voice cool but rising. "The law isn't your weapon, Stephen. It's our shield. And you've never read it to protect, only to punish." The stage was no longer a debate floor. It had become a courtroom. And Jasmine Crockett had just made her opening statement. Stephen Miller's jaw tensed. For a second, he didn't speak. The audience could feel it, the moment when a man realizes the script he practiced all week was just ripped apart in under a minute. He shuffled his notes, trying to recover. "With all due respect, Congresswoman, the founders built this country on the principle of order. They anticipated chaos, and they gave strong leaders the tools to preserve the republic." Jasmine didn't even blink. "Oh, Stephen," she said, her tone now laced with restrained fire, "you keep invoking the founders like they were a choir of saints. Let's talk about who they wrote that Constitution for." A ripple of silence swept the room. "They didn't write it for people who look like me. Or people who look like you, frankly. They wrote it for white, landowning men. They wrote it for a version of order that excluded justice." Stephen interrupted, voice rising slightly. "You're distorting history." Jasmine cocked her head. "No. I'm correcting the story your party keeps whitewashing." Applause erupted from the back of the audience. The moderator attempted to restore balance, but the tension had already taken full shape. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was a reckoning. She leaned in again. "You quote law like it's settled scripture. But law evolves. Slavery was legal. Jim Crow was legal. Interracial marriage was once illegal. And yet here we are." Stephen's eyes narrowed. "So what, tear it all down?" Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "No, Stephen. We build. But we build knowing what the structure excluded in the first place. You treat the Constitution like a cage. I treat it like a contract, one we're still rewriting to include the people you keep leaving out." Even the cameras seemed to hesitate, unsure whether to cut or stay live. Stephen sat back in silence, his argument hollowed. Jasmine turned to the audience, her eyes scanning the room. "This isn't about law. It's about who the law protects. And I'm done pretending your interpretation serves justice." The moderator finally spoke. We need to go to commercial." But nobody moved. When the broadcast returned, the energy in the room had shifted. Stephen Miller tried to wear the calm mask again, but his fingers tapped nervously on the table. The moderator looked his way, signaling he could respond. Stephen straightened. "You speak with passion, Congresswoman," he said, forcing composure. But passion isn't policy. I'm not here to apologize for America's history. I'm here to defend what makes it strong: law, order, and the courage to act decisively. Jasmine leaned forward, arms resting gently but firmly on the table. Her expression was serene, but her words dropped like thunder. Stephen, you confuse control with courage. There's nothing brave about using law as a weapon against the powerless. He opened his mouth, but she didn't pause. Real courage is admitting this country's foundation was cracked from the beginning, and doing the hard work to rebuild it. The audience stirred again, this time with slow, steady applause. Jasmine turned her gaze directly to the camera. And to those watching at home who've been told that demanding justice means being unpatriotic? Let me say it plain, it is the most American thing you can do. Stephen scoffed. That's poetic, but it's not governance. Jasmine snapped her attention back to him. You're right. It's not governance, it's leadership. Something you wouldn't recognize because your policies never lead. They restrict. They punish. They silence. She stood, slowly, her voice unwavering. But I won't be silent. Not while people like you twist liberty into a leash. A hush fell over the room. Stephen stared up at her, unsure if he was watching a debate or a political awakening unfold in real time. Jasmine turned once more to the audience. We've tried your version of America, Stephen. We've watched it choke our schools, our ballots, and our bodies. And now we're rewriting the script, line by line, law by law. The moderator didn't dare speak, not yet. Because no one interrupts when the gavel is in the hands of truth. Stephen Miller didn't stand. He stayed seated, blinking like he was waiting for someone, anyone, to step in and reset the balance. But there was no saving throw this time. Jasmine Crockett had taken the conversation, turned it inside out, and laid the truth bare on the table. Still, he tried. You act like laws are supposed to bend to emotion, he said tightly. The moment we stop applying them equally. Jasmine cut him off. Equally? Her voice rose, not in anger, but in disbelief. Stephen, let's talk about equal application. Black men get arrested for broken taillights. Women get criminalized for seeking healthcare. Yet billionaires dodge justice with NDAs and donations. The crowd murmured, then swelled with approval. Jasmine stepped from the table and walked a few steps forward, the stage lights casting a long shadow behind her. She turned slowly to face him. You call this law? I call it selective protection. And the people are waking up to who you're really protecting. Stephen leaned forward. That's demagoguery, not debate. No, Jasmine snapped. That's data. That's lived experience. That's watching entire communities be overpoliced while white-collar crime gets a slap on the wrist, if that. She paused, locking eyes with him. You love to speak of law as if it's sacred. But a law that cannot be questioned isn't sacred, it's authoritarian. The moderator's voice was hesitant. Congresswoman, would you like to offer a final response? Jasmine smiled, just slightly. I already have. She returned to her seat, calm again, but the silence in the studio was different now. It wasn't tension. It was reckoning. Stephen sat back, visibly cornered, not by shouting. Not by personal attack. But by a simple, undeniable sequence of facts wrapped in conviction. Jasmine didn't win by volume. She won by clarity. And the nation, still watching, felt it. The clip had barely aired 10 minutes before it went viral. News outlets scrambled to cut it clean for primetime. Commentators raced to frame it, some calling it a masterclass in restraint, others, a direct hit to conservative dogma. But the most telling reaction? Silence. From Stephen Miller's usual allies, from lawmakers who normally leap to defend him, there was nothing. No rebuttal. No statement, just quiet. Inside the studio, Jasmine sat in her dressing room, phone buzzing non-stop. Staffers peeked in with updates, trending hashtags, messages from civil rights leaders, even reporters requesting comment from her campaign. She scrolled past them all, pausing only at a single message from a woman in Milwaukee. "My son asked me tonight why that man kept interrupting you. I told him, because she's telling the truth. Thank you for not backing down." Jasmine exhaled slowly. The weight of the moment hadn't fully settled until that message. This wasn't just politics. It was something deeper. Cultural, emotional, historical. A knock at the door. The moderator from earlier stepped in, hesitating. "I've never seen that happen before," he said, tone mixed with awe and uncertainty. "Not with him." Jasmine stood, smoothing her jacket. "He expected a performance. I gave him facts." The moderator nodded, then added, "You also gave people hope." Jasmine glanced at her reflection, calm, composed, unshaken. "Hope isn't a strategy," she said. "It's the fuel." Down the hall, Stephen was still pacing. His team argued about optics, whether he looked flustered, whether the networks would spin it. But no amount of spin could erase the image now etched into millions of screens: Jasmine Crockett, standing tall, dismantling a doctrine with poise and precision. Outside the building, a small crowd had gathered, holding signs with phrases Jasmine hadn't coined, but had inspired. One read, "Tell the truth, even if your voice shakes." Another simply said, 60 seconds. One lesson. And in that moment, she understood something: this wasn't just about winning a debate. It was about breaking a pattern. The following morning, Stephen Miller emerged on a conservative morning show, his tone composed but clipped. "What happened last night," he began, "wasn't a debate, it was a spectacle. A performance masquerading as truth." But his eyes betrayed him, twitching just slightly, the corner of his mouth tight. He was rattled. The hosts tried to prop him up. "You handled it well," one offered. "She came in emotional." Stephen smirked. Emotion without principle is chaos. But across the country, people weren't buying it. Jasmine Crockett, meanwhile, sat with Joy Reid on the readout, her tone measured but fierce. "I didn't come to argue," she said. "I came to remind people what the law looks like when it forgets who it's meant to protect." Joy nodded, leaning in. "And Stephen?" Jasmine chuckled. "Stephen thinks law is a tool." I reminded him it's a promise. The audience in the studio clapped softly. Joy smiled, then looked into the camera. "There's something changing," she said. "Because the old way, where people like Miller talk and everyone else nods, is cracking." "And Jasmine? You're part of the reason it's breaking." Jasmine didn't flinch. "Let it break." Meanwhile, clips of Jasmine's takedown played on TikTok, recaptioned by Gen Z creators. "This is how you do it." Political YouTubers dissected it frame by frame. Civil rights attorneys quoted her line about sacred laws and authoritarianism. Even high school debate teams started circulating the footage. But it wasn't just the words. It was her presence. She didn't scream. She didn't flail. She stood still, and let the truth speak. Later that night, Miller released a written statement on X. It was long, defensive, filled with vague constitutional references. Jasmine responded with one word. Understood. And with that, the internet did what it does best: it laughed, it remixed, and it made the moment immortal. Capitol Hill wasn't quiet the next morning. Inside the Senate cafeteria, murmurs spread like wildfire. A few aides pulled out their phones, rewatching the now viral clip of Jasmine Crockett's reply, "Understood." Senators glanced at one another, some amused, others disturbed. Stephen Miller walked through the hallway with a carefully guarded expression, flanked by two advisors who spoke in hushed, urgent tones. "You need to pivot," one said. "Reclaim the narrative." But the narrative had already left the station. Outside, protesters held up signs. One read, "Law is a promise, not a weapon." Another, "Jasmine for justice." Cable news couldn't get enough. Even conservative pundits were forced to acknowledge the shift. Whether you agree with her or not, a host on a right-wing panel said reluctantly, Jasmine Crockett controlled that room. And she did it without shouting. Meanwhile, Jasmine was invited to speak on Face the Nation. She wore a navy blue blazer and calm authority. When asked if she felt she had attacked Miller, she smiled lightly. "I didn't attack him," she said. "I corrected him. There's a difference." The host blinked. "Do you believe he's unqualified?" "I believe Stephen Miller knows the law," Jasmine said. "But I also believe he's weaponized it against the people it was designed to protect. And I refuse to let that slide in silence." Backstage, producers exchanged glances. One whispered, "That clip's going to explode." And it did. That evening, Stephen Miller finally took to the stage at a private Federalist Society fundraiser. He spoke confidently, but the spark was gone. Every few minutes, someone's phone screen lit up with a meme of Jasmine standing over him, captioned simply, 60 seconds was all she needed. Back in her hotel room, Jasmine scrolled briefly through the messages pouring in. A text from her mother read, "Proud doesn't even begin to cover it." She looked out the window, the Washington night glowing faintly beneath her. She wasn't done, not even close. And Miller? He finally understood what it felt like when the law looked back. The next committee hearing wasn't supposed to be explosive. On paper, it was a bland review of procedural language for a bipartisan ethics reform bill. But everyone in the chamber knew better. Stephen Miller had requested to testify again. And Jasmine Crockett was still on the panel. From the moment he walked in, the tension was electric. This time, Miller came in prepared, not just with talking points, but with reinforcements. Two constitutional scholars sat behind him like silent guards. He had the look of a man who'd rehearsed every possible line of attack. But Jasmine hadn't rehearsed. She didn't need to. When Miller began speaking, he leaned heavily on abstractions, originalist intent, federal supremacy, natural law. He dropped phrases like duty-bound precedent as if they were shields. Jasmine let him finish, her pen motionless on the desk. Then she asked one question. "Mr. Miller, where in your vision of law is the people?" He blinked. I'm sorry. The people. You talk about law like it's an antique, something to preserve behind glass. But where is the human being in your logic? Where is the person falsely imprisoned? The child denied health care? The voter purged? Miller's mouth opened, then closed. You said last week that I didn't understand law. That I was emotional. But let me be clear, if your version of the law requires silence in the face of suffering, then I reject it with every fiber of my being. The room froze. The scholars behind Miller leaned slightly forward, as if unsure whether to intervene. Jasmine continued, her voice like flint striking steel. Law is not theory on parchment. It's pain. It's justice. It's power. And if you've never had it used against you, if you've never feared the knock at the door, then maybe you're the one who doesn't understand it. Gasps. A senator on the far end of the bench actually lowered his head. Miller looked down at his notes, hands clenched. He had no answer. Not this time. The fallout was immediate. Clips of Jasmine's dismantling of Stephen Miller flooded social media. In less than 2 hours, #JasmineStrikesAgain was trending nationwide. Late-night hosts rewound her words with awe, while legal analysts called her remarks a masterclass in people-centered jurisprudence. But for Jasmine, the moment was bigger than headlines. She walked out of the hearing room slowly, flanked by a wall of press. Congresswoman Crockett. Will you run for Senate? Did you intend to shame Stephen Miller on national TV? She paused. Then turned. "I don't set out to shame anyone," she said calmly. "But I also don't apologize for telling the truth, especially when the truth makes people uncomfortable." Back in his office, Stephen Miller sat stone-faced, scrolling through dozens of headlines. Crockett schools Miller again. Is this the face of a new Democratic era? From firebrand to frontline. His staff remained silent. Then, a junior aide whispered, "Should we issue a response?" Miller nodded slowly. "Draft something about political theater, mention decorum." But even as he said it, he knew the damage was done. Across town, Jasmine sat in her office, flipping through old court case files. Her staff buzzed with excitement, fielding interview requests and invitation offers. But she wasn't focused on any of it. Her eyes were on one page. An old Texas case involving a wrongly incarcerated man. She circled a paragraph with her pen and whispered to herself, "This is where it starts." Because for Jasmine, every takedown wasn't an ending, it was an opening. An opening for legislative reform. An opening for those whose names never made the headlines. That night, she met with a group of grassroots organizers. No cameras. No microphones. Just people, mothers, ex-inmates, teachers, and activists. "I don't need praise," Jasmine told them. "I need progress. You with me?" A chorus of yes filled the room. And while the media focused on the spectacle, Jasmine focused on the structure, the system she'd been fighting to change. The courtroom was still buzzing. But Jasmine? She was already moving to the next battle. The next morning, Jasmine Crockett stepped onto a national morning show. The host smiled, ready with a scripted introduction. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, the voice that just shook Washington. But Jasmine cut in gently. "Let's skip the flattery. We've got things to fix." The studio fell silent, momentarily thrown off. But that was the Crockett effect, no wasted time, no detours. Just the truth. They rolled the clip again, Jasmine challenging Stephen Miller, her words echoing with clarity and conviction. "What's next?" the host asked. "More viral takedowns?" Jasmine leaned in. "I'm not interested in going viral. I'm interested in going deep. Into policy. Into communities. Into the root of the rot." She then did something unexpected, she read a letter aloud. It was from a mother in Georgia whose son had been wrongly imprisoned. She'd watched Jasmine's hearing and wrote. "You spoke like someone who'd seen the inside of our struggle. You reminded me we weren't invisible." Jasmine's voice softened. "That's why I do this. Not for ratings. For reminders." That night, Stephen Miller appeared on a right-wing talk show. His tone was clipped, defensive. "She made it personal," he claimed. "That's not what the law is about." But even his base seemed fractured. Some hosts defended him. Others shook their heads. Miller underestimated her. That's on him. Meanwhile, Jasmine returned to Capitol Hill, where a small, handwritten sign had been taped to her office door. It read, 60 seconds. A whole new standard. Inside, her staff had already drafted new language for a bill to address wrongful prosecutions. She scanned it, nodded, and said, "Add community review boards. This isn't just legal. It's personal." Outside, journalists waited for another fiery soundbite. But Jasmine didn't stop. She didn't pose. She simply worked. Because when you school someone in 60 seconds, the real lesson comes in what you build afterward. And Jasmine Crockett was just getting started. When the lights dim and the headlines fade, what remains? For Jasmine Crockett, it's never been about the spotlight, it's always been about the people. In 60 seconds, she didn't just school Stephen Miller, she reminded a nation that knowledge, courage, and truth still hold power in a system drowning in performance. She turned confrontation into clarity. She transformed a takedown into a teachable moment. And in doing so, she proved that justice isn't delivered in sound bites, but in what you build after the noise. This wasn't just a viral moment. This was a warning shot. And for those still underestimating her? Class is still in session.